have several of those live images that we will continue to bring to you on this Tuesday morning. Also taking a live look here at the hospital there in Gaza, and we also have a live image coming out of Jerusalem in Israel. Continuing on with some more of this developing story, the Associated Press saying this: Israel and Hamas moving ahead on a key first step of the tenuous Gaza ceasefire agreement on Monday by freeing hostages and prisoners, raising hopes that the U.S. brokered deal might lead to a permanent end to the 2-year war that ravaged the Palestinian territory. Still, issues do persist, one of those being whether Hamas will disarm and who will govern Gaza, and also the question of the Palestinian statehood. Joining us now to discuss all of these developments is Mariam Wahba. She is a research analyst for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Mariam, good to have you here.
Good to be with you this morning.
So a lot has happened throughout the last several hours. We saw yesterday live those hostages being returned to their families, being checked out by medical staff. Also, nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners freed from Israeli captivity. But what has happened since then? And when I say since then, it's after the fact that President Trump also went to Egypt to meet with world leaders.
Absolutely. The last 24 hours have been action-packed for the Middle East. And like you rightfully noted, we're seeing some of the hostages return to Israel and the Palestinian prisoners return to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank as per the ceasefire deal. In the hours that followed the hostage release and the prisoner release on the Palestinian and Israeli side, we saw President Trump travel to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt to sign this historic deal. And he was flanked by Qatari leaders, Egyptian leaders, and Turkish leaders. Notably missing from the panel of signatories is Bibi Netanyahu himself, who's, of course, the last party on the ceasefire deal. And there's a lot to unpack here with what comes in the next phase. And as President Trump talked about on Air Force One after he signed that deal, phase 2 is already in action, but there's more to come on what exactly that entails and how willing Hamas and Israel are willing to cooperate over the next few days.
We're continuing with this live image that we have over there in Hostage Square, several of those Israeli flags. And just yesterday, we saw thousands of people really down there in Tel Aviv, similar to what we have been seeing throughout the last several months, or really the last couple of years since this war first began. But let's go back to some of the questions that still remain here, because the first phase of the deal has gone underway with those hostages finally being released by Hamas. But really, it gets trickier going forward, especially when it comes to making sure that Hamas is going to disarm and then deciding who is going to govern the Gaza Strip. Talk to us a little bit about how that plan formulates throughout the next several months.
You're on the money, Karel. Look, phase 2 is going to be where things get a little sticky, and there's been ambiguity from all parties on what exactly phase 2 entails. We've seen the White House dodge certain questions on what it means and what Hamas disarmament looks like. And I think the ambiguity is on purpose, because I think all parties are a little unsure of what phase 2 looks like. I think the priority has been getting through phase 1, which is this hostage release. I think we're also forgetting that phase 1 is not entirely complete at the moment, where Israel still has several dozen deceased hostages' bodies in Gaza, and that was supposed to be part of phase 1. I think looking to the next few days and weeks as we begin to unpack what phase 2 might entail, I think all eyes should be on the Arab states, that is Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, to really hold Hamas's feet to the fire. And look, they have to be able to tell this terrorist organization that we signed this deal, we're responsible to both Israel and the White House to make sure you follow through with your end. And I think that'll be a telling moment in how the rest of the ceasefire will go.
Mariam, I want to showcase a social media post that just came in. Thank you to my producer for flagging this, from the Israel Defense Forces. Here, a couple of photos here from hostages, 2 deceased hostages who were recovered, and it says this: IDF representatives informed the families of Guy Luz, Bipin Joshi, and 2 additional deceased hostages whose names have not yet been cleared for publication by their families that their loved ones have been brought back for burial. According to the information and intelligence available to the IDF, Guy was abducted alive and injured by Hamas after escaping the Nova Music Festival. Guy died from his wounds after not receiving proper medical treatment while held captive. He was 26 years old at his death Bipin was abducted at the age of 23 from a shelter in Kibbutz Alumim by Hamas. It is assessed that he was murdered in captivity during the first months of war. Final conclusions will be determined after the completion of the examination of the circumstances of death by the National Center of Forensic Medicine. The IDF expresses deep condolences to the families and continues to make every effort to return all of the hostages as Hamas is required to fulfill its part. And then it cuts out there, but it's part of that first phase of this deal. Mariam, that brings me to my next question. How difficult will it be for Hamas to complete that end of their bargain? We're talking about a place that has been ravaged by war for more than 2 years. Who is going to make sure that those bodies are returned? And how can we guarantee that Hamas even knows where they are?
What a great question. Look, from our understanding of what the ceasefire entails and what the Arab partners have had to cooperate in their signatures on the ceasefire agreement, is that the Arab partners are supposed to help Hamas find these deceased, murdered bodies of Israeli hostages. We have it on good intel that there's a Turkish cooperation with Hamas inside Gaza to recover these bodies. And the next few days will not be easy. But this statement by the F is a perfect reminder of exactly how this war started on October 7th. It was Hamas that abducted innocent Israeli civilians, murdered them, and dragged their deceased bodies back to Gaza. So it's really going to come down to Hamas and their Arab partners to ensure that the next few days go smoothly.
I want to go back to that meeting that President Trump had with several world leaders there in Egypt yesterday. We weren't just talking about Arab countries, but we saw several European leaders also there, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. I do believe French President Emmanuel Macron was there as well. Talk to me about the partnerships that all of these countries have developed in trying to end this war and trying to make sure that peace can be established in the region.
Absolutely. Look, this was a display of power. This was a display of show and might by all parties involved. I do have to be, I can't mince words here and say that every Arab or non-Arab leader in attendance at this ceremony had the same level of skin in the game as the United States had when it comes to these ceasefire. The president has made it a personal goal of his to get these hostages released and to, as he said, bring peace to the Middle East after 2 years of bloody war. Now, we've seen different European leaders over the last few weeks help and hinder ceasefire deals and ceasefire negotiations in several ways. The first thing that comes to mind is obviously Palestinian state recognition that we've seen by several EU members. And I can confidently say that certainly did not help ceasefire negotiations. We have Secretary of State Marco Rubio gone on record saying that when several European states came out to recognize the Palestinian state, it actually created a halt in ceasefire negotiations because Hamas felt like they had more leverage when that occurred. So all this to say that every single person in attendance, every single leader in attendance at yesterday's ceasefire signing negotiation was there for a specific reason, and none other than President Donald J. Trump was there for selfless reasons, because he made it a personal goal of his to achieve this ceasefire and to return the Israeli hostages dead and alive back to Israel.
Mariam, I have yet another social media post here from the Israel Defense Forces saying this. Earlier today, several suspects were spotted crossing the yellow line and approaching IDF troops in northern Gaza, a clear violation of the agreement. After multiple attempts to distance them, the suspects refused to comply, prompting troops to open fire to remove the threat. Reports of terrorists infiltrating an IDF position are incorrect. The IDF urges Gaza residents to follow instructions and keep their distance from IDF troops. Mariam, what is the situation like on the ground right now? Because there is a ceasefire in place, but clearly is still a lot of activity.
Absolutely. Look, the ceasefire means that good things are happening on the front between Israel and Hamas, correct? We are looking at cessation of hostilities on both ends, and we're looking at hostage releases and prisoner releases as a result of that ceasefire. That does not mean that Gaza has ceased being a battlefield. This is a small strip of land that has been the primary ground for Hamas infiltration, Hamas using human shields and schools and hospitals as their foreground for launching this war against Israel. We're also seeing something very disturbing, and that is anti-Hamas clans, anti-Hamas families within the Gaza Strip being targeted by Hamas under the guise of this ceasefire. And I think there's a lot of disturbing news coming out of Gaza because we're seeing Hamas capitalize on this Israeli cessation in order to come after what they call Israeli collaborators or people within the Gaza Strip that see Hamas as the threat that it is.
So, Mariam, we're still not even through phase one of this Gaza peace plan proposal. There's a lot that still needs to be done. And I don't even want to take too big of a chunk out of what we could expect coming up. So even if we talk about the next several hours today and we condense it to 24 hours, what do you really have your eye on for today?
Certainly. I think the biggest thing that we should all keep our eye on is exactly how the Arab partners in this ceasefire agreement hold Hamas's feet to the fire. We know that Hamas breaks ceasefire agreements. If you look back at the last half dozen ceasefires, even not within the October 7th war that started in 2023, they have a history of breaking ceasefires and violating them in a not so quaint way. So I think when it comes to watching what the next few hours and days bring, we know that POTUS was in Cairo signing this ceasefire alongside our Arab partners, and I think it's up to them to ensure that Hamas keeps its side of the deal.
Mariam Wahba, a research analyst for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We certainly appreciate your time here at LiveNOW from Fox on this Tuesday. It's still developing early stages with the ceasefire. We do have those 20 remaining living hostages that were returned, and we'll have to see what comes next throughout the next several days. But Mariam, thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to step away for a quick commercial break, taking you back out live to the image that we have been showcasing throughout this entire interview. That includes Hostage Square over there in Tel Aviv. A very different picture, what we're seeing this morning, to what we saw yesterday, a bit more calmer. Yesterday, thousands of people, as I mentioned, around this time were gathered there waiting for the release of those hostages that have been returned to their friends and family.